Today I want to talk about courage and masculinity and going through pain in your life, going through tough times where you probably need it most. And one of the saddest things about masculinity today is usually what's sold in terms of what men's development is not courageous. What is being called courageous, what is being called brave, what is being called masculine is one of the weakest things you can do. And I really want to unwind this with you today on today's episode. If you care about being a better man, if you really care about one of the greatest traits and values that masculinity has, I really want you to listen to this. I want you to discuss it, and I want you to join our communities to be able to grow with it. Let's get started. Gentlemen, Steve Maeda here. I'm the founder of Austin Men's Development. I'm also the founder of the many different things I'm going to talk about here, the Rising Man, which you can find the links down below, as well as Men's Development Excellence. Now, I've been a men's coach for 15 years. I've worked with men in some pretty high-level areas, whether that's dealing with trauma, dating, sex, all sorts of addiction stuff, you name it. And a lot of the things that we talk about, especially on Austin Men's Development, you can get the free link, the board to the link to the free board down below, is divorce and a lot of the tough things that come with that, and of men searching for forms of masculinity, searching for ways to better themselves, and a lot of the times coming to us with a ill perspective of masculinity. So when we talk about courage, which let me just tell you is one of the greatest traits that you're going to have as a human being, but uniquely as a man, courage speaks differently than it does for women. And when we hear about courage, we hear two things. We hear, number one, people in men's development and self-help revolving around men to do something hyper-masculine, do something really brave, really tough, to walk into the fire, to sacrifice yourself, to believe in this fixture of alphaness that we're going to be, and so on. And this is a lot of times how we feel courage is played out. And these are all courageous things: to be strong, to be powerful, to be wealthy, to walk into hard situations, to fight. These are courageous things. These are traits of being a man that are unique and good, and I do not want to devalue them. But if we only have those traits, it's the denial of other things within us. It's actually one of the weakest things we can do. So I want to talk about the second form of expression when we hear about men's development and so on, when it comes down to things like courage or different principles of change, is we then hear a hyper-feminized version coming from people, talking about toxic masculinity and so on, and people compensating with their masculinity. This is true. There is a compensation there are people fronting with masculinity massively in our culture, but at the same time, just because that can be true, it doesn't mean that we should ever deny what is masculine. And this is where the big dispute comes up. There are people who are looking to fight back to find masculinity and the truth of what being a human being is in this modern world that's complex and very different, that are basically denying any feminine approach and looking at only a masculine approach. And then there's a feminine perspective denying the masculine approach, and nothing gets solved here. This is not the way that we need to do things. And so when we talk about finding courage, and especially finding courage in tough, hard situations like divorce, and much of the discussion on the Austin Men's Development Board, is we need to start looking at how men heal, how men really heal. And I want to talk about this because, again, I've done some pretty courageous things in my life that, I've saved people from drowning, I've gotten in fights, I've walked into hard situations, I've walked through hard situations, but I want to talk about something that I published over email and then ended up putting on the Austin Men's Development Board and many different venues where you can read about it, about a story of courage I want you to have perspective over. So years and years ago, about 8 years ago, I was in a tactical fighting group. It was working under one of the instructors who trained with Paul Vunak, who's trained SEAL Team 6 and is known for some of the more violent things, and especially the way Vunak trained back in the day. From what I've been told by the different people that have worked with him, but not so much now. He's much more light, and you get older and you don't want to get sued, but very violent. And it was dependent upon extreme fighting, going in public, putting yourself in tough situations, usually involving drugs and violence and kidnappings, and fighting your way out of it or escaping in a way where you didn't have to fight. And this was a huge model from how we trained in what was called progressive fighting systems, and it was a pretty big deal. I did it for 2 years, and I'll tell you why it was only 2 years. So in that, I had a tremendous friend amazing guy, lifelong buddy. We bonded in so many areas. We were both in recovery, had major hardcore drug problems, big time into violence, had fucked up childhoods, his on a level which I couldn't even comprehend. And other guys in the group too. All of us knew an expression of this human form of fighting, and that's what we did. We fought and we hurt each other really bad. And read the write-up, but Matt is his name. We trained a lot, and we ended up hurting each other really bad. He ended up relapsing. Part of that was my fault and the sustaining of injuries. I also was somebody who worked with him very closely in recovery, and every day Matt would call me when he was relapsing. I mean, like, we stayed up at this restaurant called Kirby Lane in Austin, just eating one night, and he was like, man, I just don't want to use, so I need people around me. I'm on some pain meds because of the injury, and I just want to make it through this, and yada, yada, yada. And Matt, I left him at 1 a.m. He ended up using later that night. He called me in the morning saying, man, Steve, please help me. I don't want to die. I don't want to die. I have a kid. I don't want her to grow up like I did. His mom overdosed and died. He grew up highly abused and in really, truly evil situations that a child should never have to go through, which I actually thought he was lying about, but then later confirmed because it was just too extreme. And he called me every day, multiple times a day after that, saying, man, come get me, break down my door and get me and take me to a rehab, and show up at his place, he'd be gone or something, I don't know. We did wellness checks, the fire department cops come over, make sure he's safe, and the couple times they interacted with him, I guess they felt he was good enough to not be detained. Anyway, within 11 days of that time of me hurting him and him getting his ear ruptured, which is what happened, he was dead and he overdosed. And the day he died, actually, he messaged me, I think at like 11 a.m. and he's like, dude, you need to come over now, man. I think I'm gonna die. I think I'm gonna have a heart attack. I'm on too much shit and I can't die. I can't do it. And this is for the previous 11 days or 10 days. It was like the same thing. So I went over there, nothing, called him up. I even had the phone message saved on my phone because he left a voicemail for a while, and would listen to it from time to time, and he was dead. And his brother found him dead with, I think, the fire department or the police or maybe ambulance, I don't know. And I didn't find him dead. And man, nonetheless a big deal. And I know a lot of people who've died of addiction, but Matt's death really affected me in a lot of ways. And so one of the things that in this whole thing is coming back to men's development. That's some painful shit, man. When I wrote up the email, I started crying. I was in a cafe, and to have the guilt, to have the pain, to have him tell me so much of what he told me is a piece of pain that I will hold on to for the rest of my life, and I hope I do. And the guilt that I have for hurting him, the guilt that I have for leaving at 1 a.m., the guilt I have for not doing the right things to get him into a rehab facility, the guilt I have just for fucking all of it, man. And you can argue back and forth. You don't need to feel guilty. I get all that, man. I work with addicts. I know people that die on sometimes a weekly basis, but definitely on a monthly basis that I've worked with closely. And I get all that shit. What I want to say is the courage that we're missing in masculinity is that in that moment I had to heal like a man, which did mean I took on feminine traits, which everybody's running from and thinking are bad, of crying, but at the same, and of feeling sad and of begging God or whatever for forgiveness, and all these different things came into the process of sorting through that, and still to this day, and making the peace and making the, I don't know, man, the finding life after it. And I have, and this was 8 years ago, and man, I just have a lot of experience with this sort of thing. what I want to tell you is so many men run from ever feeling anything, and they think that this hyper masculine approach is the way to go. And Matt and I were part of something that was hyper masculine, and that's how we lived as very hyper masculine when it came to fighting, when it came to how we represented ourselves, when it came to business. I mean, dude, the guy was phenomenal. When it came to relationships and so on, when it came to these types of things, we lived as men in the definition of what most men wished they could, and for whatever that means, but we were hyper masculine, but we also had pain. We also had tremendous amounts of pain that had to pass, and it affected us in so many ways. And this is what I'm getting at when it comes to men's development. We hear the answer for you feeling bad as being courageous is representing yourself as somebody that you're not. As you representing yourself, not as the complete picture, but to be courageous means to be who you are now. If I am hurt, if I am sad, if I go through something where I don't know what to do because I've never gone through this before in my life, I should never feel bad for that. And the courage is to feel and be oneself in that. Now, in those times, I have panicked, I have hurt, I've been afraid for my life, I have been totally dismantled in all the ways that one might think a man might be. But because of that, I can be the man that I am. And it's so weird because we're all running from these different forms of not being polluted by femininity, or compromising our masculinity, which is being attacked by the culture. No, man, you never have a shortage of what's inside you to tap into. You might need guidance, and that's why I'm in business. You might need somebody to help you along that way, or a community. But man, do not ever sell yourself on the idea that you are handicapped in some sort of way. I get it, man. It can be hard to live in American culture. It can be hard to live in Western culture. There's reasons why I travel around and live the life that I live, is because it can be easier in ways. But do not ever make an excuse of not being able to find excellence within you, because it can always be found. And if you go through a time where you truly are victimized and disempowered, where you truly cannot do it because somebody has done something to you or is doing something to you, or you're kidnapped or held hostage, and these are realities that have been in my life that I have lived through, then yes, you can't do anything, and you have to sit there, you have to take it, you have to get to safety. I mean, this was part of like Vunak's training, was to get in a safe. It didn't matter if you won the fight, it mattered if you lived. And in that, you might not have the most masculine experience, but through that, you might learn something that's very valuable. And that doesn't mean you have to go and seek out and get in fights or whatever, all the stupid shit that I used to do to try and find out who I was, but that means that challenges are going to come your way. You have to be able to work with them. And that is an amazing form of masculinity. The reason why I only trained for 2 years in progressive fighting systems, maybe a little bit more, was because of that death. And after that, we just all stopped training, and then I just took it on to jiu-jitsu and no more stand-up stuff and no more even wanting to fight anybody, which was an interesting thing. In any case, guys, interesting spot to leave you off on this video. But this is what we do. This is what we do with the Rising Man. This is why I made it. I made a $20 a month program so that you guys could enter in it. And if you just want to try it out for a month, that's totally fine too. Things like MDX, things like Men's Development Excellence, that's where it's at, and that's where you really want to change, and that's really where you want to be. But man, if this is a message that you resonate with and want to move in that direction, do yourself a favor and get with the Rising Man. Try it out, see if you like it, and if it's a home for you, man, we'll definitely welcome you, because this is what we do as men. We progress and we live better. All right, talk to you guys soon. I'm out.